Well, hello, everyone. I'm Marnie Gelbart of the Personal Genetics Education Project. And on behalf of PGED and our collaborators at the Center for ELSI Resources and Analysis, it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's program on how to represent wide-ranging family structures and personal identities using the latest Pedigree Nomenclature. This is the first event of PGED and Sierra's collaborative series exploring difference in the biology classroom, and we appreciate you taking time out of your busy schedules to be here with us this evening, or at least it's evening here in Massachusetts where I am, or whatever time of day it is where you are calling in from. So we know that many of you are here because pedigrees are part of your middle school, high school, and undergraduate curriculum. For those of you who are in the classroom, you're expert in finding ways to engage your students. Pedigrees provide a great way to teach students about concepts of inheritance, and at the same time, they invite students to draw a personal connection to what they're learning. As some of you told us when you registered, there's a growing recognition that many students in the classroom do not see themselves represented using the pedigree nomenclature that many of us learned in school, surely the symbols I learned. Some of you said you're looking for tools to help you effectively and accurately teach students about complicated topics in biology. You're looking for skills to make your classrooms more inclusive of trans, non-binary, adopted, and gender fluid students. And you're looking for tips to create a welcoming atmosphere while still inviting students to ask questions. One person told us they signed up because they're an adoptee and love content like this. We're really thrilled you're all here. At PGED, we create curricula for teachers to bring conversations about genetics into your classroom so you can talk about new technologies, the benefits that many hope they will bring, as well as the very real ethical and societal concerns. And we are grateful to the teachers who bring these materials out into the world. Without you, these conversations wouldn't go very far. For many of the teachers we're fortunate to have worked with, this is a labor of love, but it's not an easy one. These are difficult times to be a teacher, and there are many competing demands on your schedules. I'm married to a high school biology teacher, and I see that sometimes my husband only has 20 minutes at 10:30 at night, sitting at the dining room table to put together a lesson plan for the next day's class. So we are really quite sympathetic at PGED about how difficult it is to keep up with all the developments in the field of genetics, how people's lives are being impacted, and evolving preferences around language. Even as a full-time job, PGED finds this a constant struggle. So today's program is part of a series that's designed to bridge conversations in bioethics departments that are all too often siloed from educators on the front lines in biology classrooms. And so before I begin, I'll just remind you that we're talking about sensitive topics that many find deeply personal. We ask that everyone is respectful and kind with the presenters and fellow participants. Today's program is going to be organized in two parts. The first hour will be a webinar with healthcare professionals, Ina Amarillo and Robin Bennett, who are eager to share their knowledge with you. They will each give a short presentation, and then we'll have a chance to respond to your questions and comments. At the end of the hour, we'll invite you to join us for an interactive discussion on classroom integration, which PGED will be hosting in a separate Zoom meeting. And this is going to be a time for educators to talk with each other, share experiences and resources about how to bring the content from today into your classrooms. And so with that, I'll pass the baton to our collaborators at Sierra to give a short introduction.
Thank you so much, Marnie. Hello, everyone. My name is Sandra Sujin Lee, and I'm a professor of medical humanities and ethics at Columbia University and co-director with Mildred Cho of the Center for ELSI Resources and Analysis. And I'm really delighted to welcome you to our first event with PGED through our collaborative ELSI Conversation series, exploring difference in the biology classroom. CIRA's ELSI conversations provide opportunities for people to come together to discuss the latest ELSI research. And we're really glad that you're going to be spending an hour with us. We ask that all attendees please abide by our code of conduct, which can be found in the chat. For those of you who may be new to CIRA, we provide resources to support research on the ethical, legal, and social implications of genetics and genomics, and serve to connect scholars, educators like yourself, scientists, policymakers, journalists, members of the public, and others to engage in ELSI issues. The CIRA is funded by the National Human Genome Research Institute at NIH and is managed by teams at Stanford and Columbia Universities in partnership with the Hastings Center and the PGED team here at Harvard University. The CIRA ELSI Hub website offers a wealth of resources to educators, and we really encourage you to get to know us. Please join the CIRA mailing list to stay up to date for our future events and access to various resources that will be mentioned in today's session. The link to sign up for our mailing list will be dropped in the chat. And just a note that all links mentioned in the chat today during the session, including the speaker and moderator biographies, as well as other resources, will be available after the event. So just a little bit of housekeeping. It was mentioned that we have a professional live captioner present today to provide captions for today's session. Just use the CC button at the bottom of the screen to access closed captioning if you would like. And please note that if you do not activate the closed captioning at the bottom of your screen, the live captions will not be visible, although they are available. Please use the Q&A box to ask your questions. We will post links to references in the chat, as I mentioned, and you should feel free to add your own references or resources in the chat if you have them. A recording of the presentations and all references will be available on the elsihub.org. And if you have any questions during the session or have any difficulties, please email us at info@elsihub.org. So with that, I'll hand it over to our speakers. Dr. Robin Bennett is a professor of medicine and program director of the University of Washington Genetic Counseling Graduate Program. And Dr. Ina Amarillo is a medical genomicist and associate professor in Washington University's Department of Pathology and Immunology. And you can get their full biographies in the chat. But with that, I'll hand it over to Robin.
Thank you so much. Excuse me, I have a little bit of a cold, so I apologize for my hoarseness. So I'm really thrilled to be here today because I became interested in becoming a genetic counselor because of my high school biology teacher. So I've always been very passionate about speaking for people who are teaching biology in the classroom. And I'm ever grateful to Mr. Bill Tuga for introducing me to this wonderful career of human genetics and medical genetics. So next slide, please. I have no financial disclosures. Next slide. This is a pedigree that my daughter drew when she was about 6 years old with no training, just from watching her mom draw pedigrees all the time. She was already thinking inclusive when she always drew rainbow pedigrees, and it's never too early to teach about pedigrees in the classroom. I do want to mention that although I have no financial disclosures, I'm speaking as a cisgender woman who uses she, her pronouns. I have grown up with a lot of white privilege, and so that may bias my views on how I see the world. Next slide. So my objectives are really to give you some gender terms that increase inclusivity in the classroom, and also to recognize inclusive pedigree symbols and family structures. I unfortunately do not have time to teach you how to draw full pedigrees today. I would love to do that in a future webinar for you. Next slide. So these are the key references that I'm using. The standard pedigree nomenclature just came out this fall, and so this is really hot off the press. We first developed the standard pedigree nomenclature in about 1993. And we've revised it. This is the third revision. And really the symbols haven't changed, just we've emphasized more inclusive language and more inclusive use. in terms of sex and gender in pedigree nomenclature and how we record it. Also, there's an article that should be out any day that challenges the practice of when we put squares as men on the left and circles as women on the right. And really, there's no reason to keep doing that practice. It doesn't really matter. So that's the article, both sides now. Next slide, please. So it's important to remember these definitions when we talk about pedigrees. So the relationship line, am I able to use the pointer? Does that show? No. The relationship line is the line between a couple that shows that they have a relationship together. The line of descent shows where their offspring are from. And then the individual's line comes from each of the symbols. So this pedigree is of a man and a woman who have a son, a daughter, and a son. And that triangle sign is actually showing a miscarriage. So you might not be as familiar with that nomenclature. Next slide. So the line of descent, if it is solid, that shows a biological relationship. If it is dotted, then that is a non-biological relationship. So this is how you show adoption. So you can see the symbols on the left show a couple who have a son who they adopted out. So that shows their biological relationship to that child. The next one is two men who have adopted a daughter. And so that's the brackets always are focused in, but you see that the line of descent is hatched. And then the one on the right is two women who have adopted a daughter and they do not have a biological relationship. So one of the things that I think comes up in the classroom is that people are worried, well, I'm adopted. How can I know my family history? But family history can start with that person. It can start with you. And so it's important to emphasize that. And a person who's adopted can show their family structure, even if they're not biologically related to those people. And more people are finding out their biological families through sources such as 23andMe and various ancestry groups. Next slide, please. So this slide, the P in the middle of the diamond stands for pregnancy, in case you're not familiar with that. And so this shows a couple where they've basically, the woman has carried the pregnancy. So she has no biological, no genetic relationship to that pregnancy, but she may have a biological, she does have a biological relationship to the pregnancy because she's carrying it. So this would be a couple where she's been impregnated with a donor embryo. There's no genetic relationship in that embryo. So basically it's an adoption of that embryo. I know that's kind of a confusing concept. Next slide. So now I'm going to talk a little bit about some of the words we use in gender inclusive topics in terms of describing family histories and structures. And these words are really important. It's really important that we use words because they have that are correct, because they impact the people who hear them and who read them. And they also influence how we interpret our science. So the language that I'm going to use is actually the most correct way to represent science when we're talking about inclusivity. And it's just as important that we remember to be inclusive and include people in with this language, and not just what we, because what we don't say is just as important. Next slide. Words evolve with time. Even while we were writing our paper over the last couple of years, the words changed. And so the words that we used in our paper are basically what's being used in this time, but it's on all of us to keep up to date with the most inclusive language. Next slide. So here's some vocabulary. Sex is a category that is often assigned at birth based on the biological attributes. So this is what you might observe at birth in terms of the appearance of the external genitalia or secondary sex characteristics when someone goes through puberty. Gender identity is a person's sense of self and how they fit into the world from the perspective of gender, which may or may not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. Cisgender is an individual whose gender identity aligns with the sex they were assigned at birth. And gender diverse is an umbrella term that is used to describe gender identities that demonstrate a diversity of expression beyond the binary framework. And I just want to emphasize that this is really important, that we recognize how many people these kinds of words are attributed to. So about 1.2 million people in the United States identify as non-binary, and 1.4 million people in the United States identify as trans. Next slide. So non-binary is a person who does not identify as either only male or only female, but instead identifies as something between or outside of these identities. And it's important to remember that not everyone is choosing to become either a man or a woman if they are trans. Many people are non-binary. They are not on that spectrum of man or woman. Trans and transgender is a person whose gender identity or gender expression does not align with the sex they were assigned at birth. People who are transgender can use the terms trans man, trans woman, trans masculine, trans feminine, non-binary, gender non-conforming, gender queer, and other terms to describe their gender identity. Next slide. Variations of sex characteristics. This is a category that is used to describe a broad description of conditions which lead to difference in the development of the urogenital tract, external genitalia, development of secondary sex characteristics, and other clinical characteristics. Sometimes this is referred to as intersex. The term intersex is embraced by some people in the community and not by others. So this isn't a word that is used to explain sometimes people who have VSC. And in general, we use the name of whatever the specific variation is. Next slide. So 4 important acronyms are assigned female at birth, AFAB, assigned male at birth, unassigned at birth, and variations of sex characteristics, VSC. Next slide. So as I've already mentioned, gender is not binary or fixed. Gender and sex are 2 different categories, and we'll use some examples coming up. The pedigree symbols should reflect a person's self-identified gender, not their sex. Symbols must also communicate biological and genetic information critical to accurate and appropriate genetic assessment and genetic counseling. Pedigrees need to communicate both sex and gender, and we don't put a karyotype unless it's actually been done. So if you have a person who is female, you wouldn't put 46XX underneath their symbol unless you know that they've had a karyotype. Next slide. So a diamond is what can be used for a person who identifies as not male or female. So this can be used as a person who is trans, and then you can put an annotation underneath. So you could put a diamond and then say AMAB, assigned male at birth, or a diamond and UAAB, unassigned at birth. It can also be used if you have a pedigree with lots of people in it and you don't know their sex assigned at birth or their gender. So you might say, you know that a person has 5 siblings, but you don't know if they identify as male or female. You could use this diamond and put a 5 inside. Next slide. So this is from our table, and it shows on the left the gender and across the sex. So the very first column, I don't know if someone can follow along with the cursor, but so the first one there is a male. So this is a person whose gender is male, their sex is male, and they're 56 years of age. To the right is a person who is assigned female at birth. They identify their gender as a man, or well, in this case, a man. They're 34 years of age. And then unassigned at birth, this person sex is unassigned at birth. they are a man or a boy, and they are 28 years old. Here, the next line down, we have a person whose gender is a woman. She's assigned male at birth, and she's 56 years of age. The next one is a woman who is 34 years old age. Her sex is female, and she's a woman or a girl. And then we have a person who's unassigned at birth who identifies as a woman or a girl. And then the last row is a person who's assigned male at birth. They are gender diverse or non-binary, and they're 56 years of age. The next person is a person assigned female at birth, and they are, and they're 34 years of age. And then the last person is a person who's 28 years old, unassigned at birth, who's non-binary or gender diverse. So I know this is complicated information, but hopefully this kind of sets the stage for you. Next slide. So here is how you can use, if you have multiple people assigned male at birth. So here you have on the top column, you have multiple individuals, and there are 2 men. In the next one, there are 2 women. In the next one, there are 2 people who are non-gender, who are non-binary or gender diverse, assigned male at birth. And then here would be 2 people where you know that they have 2 relatives, but you don't know their sex or their gender, so you just used a diamond. And then you can use an N when there's multiple people and you just don't know how many people are in that family. So let's say somebody has lots of uncles, but you don't know how many, so you could just put an N in there. Same, lots of women, you don't know how many, you just put an N in there. Here's if you know lots of people and you don't know their gender, assigned male at birth or assigned female at birth. And then the last one, you can use a slash to say a person's deceased. So here is a person who died in 1981, assigned male at birth, identifies as a man or a boy. Here's a girl who died at 4 months of age. Here's a person who was trans, who was assigned female at birth, died at 86. And here's somebody who don't know their sex or gender who died in 2002. All right, next. So this gets a little bit more complicated. So P stands for pregnancy. So a P inside the symbol stands for pregnancy. So figure A, the D stands for donor. So here you have 2 women where one of the women is carrying the pregnancy, and the couple has used a donor sperm to conceive that pregnancy. So this would be what we normally consider as assisted reproduction with donor sperm. Figure B is a couple where there's a pregnancy, she's carrying the pregnancy, and they're using a donor sperm. So in this case, maybe her male partner is infertile, and they have used a donor sperm to conceive a pregnancy that she's carrying. In number C, you have a couple where they are using one of the women's brother as the donor sperm, but her partner is carrying the pregnancy. And then in number D, is a woman who has had 2 pregnancies, one resulting in a male child and one currently pregnant using the same donor sperm. So those people are full siblings to each other. They have the same sperm donor parent. Okay, next. So these are also a little bit more complicated and a little bit more rare. These are people who are using a donor gamete as an egg. So here you have a couple who are both male. One of them has provided the sperm for the pregnancy. It's been conceived in vitro, and then you have a donor, the woman who's carrying the pregnancy, it's her egg. So it's a male couple. They're using a surrogate who is the egg donor, also carrying the pregnancy, and one of them has contributed the sperm to the pregnancy. In number B, you have a woman who it's not her egg, it's her partner's sperm, and they're using a donor egg. So that the woman is not genetically related, but she's carrying the pregnancy. In number C, you have a couple whose the woman's sister is carrying the pregnancy for them. It's her egg, and they're using the partner's sperm. And then in the last one, this is sort of the classic man and woman have used their egg and sperm to conceive a pregnancy, and for whatever reason, that woman cannot carry the pregnancy, and so a surrogate is carrying that pregnancy. So the surrogate has no genetic relationship to that pregnancy, but has a biological relationship because she's carrying the pregnancy. Next slide, please. So here's some more symbols showing similar scenarios when a person is gender expansive or transgender. So in figure A, you have a person who is male assigned female at birth, and they are carrying the pregnancy. So the person has a uterus and eggs, and they have used a donor sperm to conceive that pregnancy. And then so the male's partner, the female, does not have a biological genetic relationship to that pregnancy. In figure B, you have a person who is transgender or gender expansive, assigned female at birth. That person has a uterus and eggs, and so they've used a donor sperm and are carrying that pregnancy. So it's basically the same constitution as figure A, only this person is trans, assigned female at birth, and non-binary. In figure C, you have a couple who has conceived a pregnancy naturally, where the person on the right is assigned male at birth, so they're contributing the sperm, and the person on the left is female, and so they're contributing the egg, and they are carrying the pregnancy. And then it's basically the same scenario in figure D, where you have a person who's trans or transgender, gender expansive, assigned male at birth. So they are contributing the sperm, their partner is carrying the pregnancy and contributing the egg, and they conceived that pregnancy naturally. So I know that's complicated. Next slide, please. So these are some examples from one of our students in our genetic counseling graduate program, Lex Powers, and they have done some transformative work looking at how we can use more inclusive language when we're teaching genetics and when we're doing genetic counseling. So as we've already discussed, instead of saying female or male, you can say assigned female at birth or assigned male at birth. And same with saying man or woman, you can say people with more than one X chromosome, as a person who has two X chromosomes, or a woman, or XX individuals. And then you can say people with Y chromosome or an XY individual, instead of using gendered language like man and woman. And then you can use egg or sperm derived for egg or sperm, say egg derived or sperm derived. And then instead of saying a mother or father, you can say an egg contributing parent or a sperm contributing parent. Instead of saying brothers or sisters, you can say siblings. Instead of aunts or uncles, you can say parents, siblings. And then instead of saying pregnant women, you can say pregnant person or a gestational carrier. And then you can refer to specific organs, such as saying a person with ovaries, a person with testes, a person with breasts. And so, for example, when I'm talking about risk for cancer, instead of saying a risk for cancer in women, I can say a risk for cancer in people with breasts. And then instead of saying female hormones, such as female hormones or male hormones, you can say testosterone or estrogen. And this is actually more correct than you saying something like female hormones or male hormones. I do want to emphasize that although this language seems maybe difficult to comprehend, you can use whatever, if a person identifies as being a male or a female, or they say I'm a mother or father, you should use that language. That's how they've identified themselves. But you shouldn't assume a person identifies a certain way without asking them. And so, again, this is, I know, kind of hard to visualize, but I do think it's more inclusive when you get down to thinking about how you describe biology. Next slide, please. So my takeaways is really family history is a great way to teach about genetics. And it really is what we use as our first genetic test. I would never order a genetic test without taking someone's family history first, because a genetic test must be interpreted in the context of a family history. Any learner can use their family history, even if they're adopted, because family history can start with them, and they can use the family that they've grown up with as their family history, because they do share those environmental influences with their family. A pedigree symbol should reflect a person's self-identified gender, not their sex. Family history in a pedigree can be used to teach genetic principles, and words matter. Gender-inclusive language is not only essential, but it is more accurate when teaching genetic principles. Next slide. So these are people that have contributed to this work, and I particularly wanted to acknowledge Lex Powers, whose work, gender-inclusive language, is really starting to be embraced by many, many people. Thank you for your time. I'm turning that over to Ina now.
Thank you so much, Robin, for setting the stage and defining sex and gender identities before my talk. Good evening, everybody. I am Ina Amarello, and I identify as a trans woman, and my pronouns are she, hers. I would like to thank the organizers for inviting me to and giving me the chance to actually share one of my strongest advocacy, which is building and creating spaces and practices that are inclusive and affirmative for gender expansive, transgender, and people with variations in sex characteristics. I have nothing to disclose. Next slide, please. So I am the director of a genomics lab. I'm not quite sure how many of you are familiar with genetic testing. Essentially, 23andMe is one example of genetic testing that's out there. And then if you have a hospital or a clinic wherein genetic testing is offered, I am the director that actually signs out or takes a look at your DNA, chromosomes, and so on. So before a sample or a patient sample comes to our laboratory, it will have to encounter with genetic counselors like Robin or medical geneticists or any kinds of clinicians. And if they suspect that the condition of the patient has a genetic basis, then they will send a sample for genetic testing. So it can be inherited or familial, or it can be somatic, or for example, cancer, or that is not inherited. Next slide, please. So when a sample gets to our laboratory, we get a sample, any types of sample. The sample comes with a requisition form. So this is just an example of a requisition form. So you can Google any genetic testing laboratories like Quest, LabCorp, and all of their requisition forms are available online. So there has been an advocacy wherein even the requisition form should be inclusive and affirmative for LGBTQIA people. Next, please. Yeah, so the spaces where there are arrows, so these are some of the important information that we need to collect as a medical clinic or a hospital or a testing center, whether it's genetics or not. Electronic medical records or information should contain not only the legal name, but also the preferred name or the preferred name used by the patient, as well as gender identity that includes trans and genderqueer or non-binary, as well as sex assigned at birth, which is not only male, female, but also would include intersex. So I'm not quite sure there are states or countries that actually allow the inclusion of the letter I or putting intersex in their birth certificate. And then questions as, do you identify as transgender? And questions for sexual orientation and also for the gender pronouns. Next slide, please. Next, please. And then, as Robin has mentioned, not everyone are amenable or comfortable with the term intersex, but there are people that has differences of sex development prefer to be called intersex instead of differences. So the history of the terminologies of this in the past, we are calling this group of individuals as hermaphrodite or pseudo-hermaphrodite. And until now, our billing codes, our hospital billing codes, there are actually terms like hermaphrodite and pseudo-hermaphrodite. So organizations and advocates are really recommending that the ICD codes should be changed into a more affirmative terms. And more recently, instead of the hermaphrodite term was changed in 2006 to intersex and disorders of sex development. But in the last few years, the disorder term in DSD was dropped and changed to differences. And the most recent modification is dropping the term differences and development and change it to variations in sex characteristics. Next slide, please. So I would just like to highlight the different types or the way we classify people with variations in sex characteristics or DSD or intersex as beyond sexual dimorphism. So in our textbooks, we have XX are females, XY are males, and now we all know that not all XX are males or would have male, not all XX would be females and would have female reproductive structures, endocrine hormones, and not all XY individuals would be male or would have male reproductive structures or endocrine hormones. So these are on the right of the table, would be some of the individuals. Say, for example, an XX individual would have a testes or both ovary and testes, or there will be absence of menstruation, or there will be too much androgen. And then for XY individuals, some of them would have a uterus or fallopian tube, or they may have underdeveloped or undescended testes, and so on. Next slide, please. So the way we perform the test in the laboratory is we can process the sample and we look at the DNA. Next slide, please. DNA, chromosomes, and we will test whether it is positive or negative. So there will be laboratory reports that would contain terms such as normal, abnormal, and so on. So this is an area where there's a strong advocacy in recent years wherein we have to drop the terms pathogenic, disease causing, especially for trans people and people with VSCs. And I will explain more about that. Next slide, please. So this is an example of just an illustration of what we actually test for in our genetics lab. So we test for metaphase chromosomes for karyotyping. We test for long interphase chromatin as well as metaphase chromosomes by using fluorescence in situ hybridization or FISH. And then we'll look at DNA, long segments or short segments of DNA by chromosome microarray analysis, as well as gene and genome sequencing at the DNA level. Next slide, please. So there are ways wherein we perform testing in the genetics lab. One is we test for sex determination or sex chromosome determination. We want to know if this individual has XX chromosome, XY chromosome, 45X. So we don't call it for XO anymore. It's for the Turner syndrome, it's 45X. Or there is a structural changes in chromosome X, chromosome Y. And at the same time, we can test an individual even without we can test an individual, and at the same time, it would show up, it would show the sex chromosomes of an individual, even if it's not requested. Next slide, please. So on the left, top left, is the human karyotype. So this, we have 46 chromosomes, 23 pairs. We have the chromosome 1 to 22 are autosome pairs, and then the and then we have the X and Y pair, and then the XX pair. And then FISH is also, as on the bottom left, is picture of XY and SRY FISH testing. So SRY is one of the genes responsible for sex determination. So it can dictate whether an individual can have a testes or not, but it's not the only gene responsible for testes formation. So what I'm just want to say about being inclusive and affirmative is that when we test an individual and we do not know whether the individual is transgender or intersex, we are advocating to change by dropping the terms female, male, normal, and abnormal. And instead, we would just write that this individual contains 46 and XY chromosomes or 46 and XX chromosomes. So this will be inclusive and affirmative, especially for transgender and intersex people or people with variations of sex characteristics. So the table on the right is would tell you that, as I mentioned earlier, that not all XX individuals would identify as female. They can identify as trans man, gender expansive, non-binary, or trans or agender. As well as XY, they can be cis male, trans woman, gender expansive, non-binary, trans, and agender as well. Next slide, please. And this is what I'm saying about the reporting of results, wherein patients can see this report, doctors can see these reports, genetic counselors can see this report. So most laboratories, we're still working on creating guidelines on how to report, on how to create an affirmative reporting of results for individuals with XX and SRY. So for example, this report contains an abnormal result because the SRY was found or detected in an XX individual. So this is a common occurrence, or not really common, but it's a rare occurrence, but it happens wherein an individual has an XX chromosomes, and at the same time, one of the X chromosomes contain SRY. And I also highlighted that this report contains the term disorders. So if you Google or look at PubMed of papers, published reports, published journals, where the terms disorders are still being used. And at the same time, homework for all of you, just Google or search in PubMed whether researchers are still using the term hermaphrodite, and you will be surprised that there are still some of them that actually use the term hermaphrodite. Next, please. And just to sum up what I'm trying to say is, even in our laboratory spaces, genetics lab, clinical chemistry labs, clinical microbiology laboratories, and any laboratories that are parts of diagnostics, we are really advocating for having positive or improved language, and as well as better designations in our laboratory reports. Next, please. And then as we came up with laboratories reports, next, please. It is now the job of the genetic counselors, our medical team, to actually impart or relay the information that were produced from the laboratory. And this as well should be in a inclusive and affirmative space or approach. Next slide, please. And I think I would like to end with that. And here are some of the resources that you can use. And if you all can go through this, I'm sure there's so many committees out there of how to be inclusive and affirmative in our high school, grade schools. Some of these are not recently updated. So I think this is a starting point where we can actually get together and try to improve the education of the younger generation about inclusivity and affirmation. And that's it. Thank you so much for the time, and thank you for listening.
Well, thank you so much, Ina and Robin, for those really rich talks and full. I mean, I can just tell watching the chat and the questions that are coming in that people are just trying to like digest every little bit. There's just so much information that I think people have been looking for, and it's really exciting to connect with you both and people who really want to distribute and make these ideas available to many more educators. So I'd like to start off the Q&A by introducing PGED's Director of Education and Engagement, Robin Bowman. So yes, two Robins now. And we'll let Robin kick off with a moderator's choice question, and then we will be pulling from the Q&A as well as some questions that people sent in ahead of time. So Robin, PGED Robin, do you want to get started?
Yes, I will. There are so many questions, and so I will apologize in advance. Like, there is no way we're going to get to all of them. We've done our best to try to group them into categories and put them together so that we can get the answers to as many as possible. But for the first one, can you share a little bit of advice for teachers? So if teachers are going to use these pedigree symbols in their class, would you advise that teachers ask students to draw their own pedigrees? And what sort of privacy issues could be involved in that? Or would you potentially offer options for doing pedigrees of fictional characters that you create? Do you have advice on that for teachers?
Yeah, so I wrote a book called The Practical Guide to the Genetic Family History, and I used an example of Harry Potter and Beckham, and so I think there are other families that you can use. I think you just want to make it safe for your students, and it can be in general, it works pretty well to do your own family history, but it can be traumatizing too. And I think it's just really important to recognize that all families have have things that have happened in them that are hard to discuss, like suicide. And when I used to teach this in elementary school, we would do the Lion King family back then, when that's what my kids liked. So I think there's ways you can be creative, or you can use a family history that you've created of someone else. Maybe a famous, somebody who's in the media, that they can use.
Great, thank you. Marty, do you want me to keep going, or did you want to hop in?
Why don't you go, and then
All
I'll
right.
jump in on the next one.
So a conversation we were recently having amongst the PG Ed staff was, and it was something new for me to learn, was that family history recording can be a sensitive topic in certain cultures. Specifically, the examples that were brought up were certain Asian and Latinx populations. So how can educators respect the cultural experiences of their students in classroom conversations about pedigree creation? And I'll just go ahead and piggyback this one on here. A question that was asked during your talk also gets at family history, and they were asking about the horizontal line between biological parents, and that horizontal line representing some type of relationship. And when we're looking historically, where maybe the relationship that happened was actually the rape of an enslaved person by the enslaver. How do you represent that occurrence, on a pedigree? Because, like, do you still call that a relationship? So two different kind of family history questions there.
Yeah, that's an excellent point. I mean, a relationship, pedigrees have a fine line between social relationships and genetic relationships. And pedigrees kind of had their history in so many convoluted ways of showing ways that you were related to royalty, to show your, or only showing the good parts of a family. So pedigrees are a challenge that way, I think, of how we respect relationships and also recognize the horrors of some relationships, like rape and enslavement. So again, the purpose in genetics, in counseling, is really to identify patterns of inheritance, help to teach people, but we also use it as a counseling tool to recognize traumas that have happened in a family. When I teach genetic counseling students, I always say, if someone says, I have a relative that died of suicide or died of cancer or an accident, you need to stop and acknowledge that the trauma that's happened in that family. Or if you recognize that a family has been killed in the Holocaust, or to acknowledge those tragedies that have happened. So they're not benign, taking a family history. I don't know if that quite answers your question, but one of the things too is when you take a family history, families in different cultures call everyone an aunt or an uncle, because they're all related to them in their heart, not necessarily in their genetics. And recently they might be in their genetics. So the point is not to, it's to be a tool, not to be it has to be just this way. I don't know if you have anything you want to add, in terms of your experiences.
I think when it comes to declaring, or especially your gender identity, a lot of patients don't actually declare it or stay incognito. So we recognize that there are actually populations out there who would not answer sex at birth and gender identity. So say, for example, if a trans woman don't want to be identified as trans, they just identify as a woman. So when it comes to a clinic, visiting a clinic, and they don't want to really answer the question of gender identity, they would just write female. So we respect that as well. So we are aware that there are people who would self-declare self-reported gender identity, and we respect that.
Well, we've had a lot of questions coming in about the use of language, and that's certainly something you both emphasized in your presentations. And you know, our educators are doing a lot in their classrooms. They're both trying to navigate like conceptually difficult material about genetics and pedigrees, and then also trying to introduce even like more complexity of the symbols and you know, language that may or may not be familiar to students. And so what advice do you have for our educators on how to do that well and avoid confusion?
I'll start first. So I identify as trans woman, and as you know now, whenever you do research or whatever efforts or projects that you want to do for a certain group of population, you have to involve them. So if you have teachers that are LGBTQIA identified, then that's perfect. And as well, the students. So they are like the evolving languages are, I would say, for a better lack of term, is generational. So if you ask the younger generation about their gender identity, I think they're more open about saying, oh, I'm fluid, I'm trans, I'm agender, I'm asexual, and so on. So I think if you have LGBTQIA students groups in your school, I think you should start there. I think, you know, they will be the ones who will tell you what is more affirmative, what is inclusive for them.
I think it can be really helpful to have, thank you, Ina, I appreciate your comments. I think it'd be really helpful as teachers when you're talking about any difficult subject to have these ground rules, sort of like which was discussed in the beginning of this session, and what to say if something is harmful, like ouch, you know, that people know that this is a safe place to talk, and that if something happened, for example, in my classroom, if someone misgenders someone, we call it calling it in, not calling it out. But we will be called in and someone will say ouch, or we'll have a clarifying moment. Please help me with this language, just to have that safety, because it is hard work that we're all doing and we're all learning. And as you know, was saying, language changes. I know when I was growing up, the word queer was considered, really, you wouldn't use that word at all. And so it's taken me a while to say, you want, it's okay to use queer now. So we all learn.
Thank you for that.
I also want to add something about, so I've been a teacher for a very long time, and my favorite subjects are reproductive structures, reproductive systems, and endocrine systems. And I've been a part of the medical school. When I was still at WashU, we changed our curriculum, and I was leading the inclusion of LGBTQIA topics in medical school curriculum. And as you can see now, all different types of schools or learning, like nursing, occupational therapy, physical therapy, they're all starting to accommodate and include LGBTQIA topics, especially in the field of reproductive and endocrine medicine.
So I know it is time to wrap up, and it's almost impossible to choose like what question to ask next. And PGED is going to go home and sit and figure out how we can get answers out to the folks on so many of these other great questions. Some of them a picture will help. I know that there was some question about resources in other languages, and Spanish was one that came up, and I'm wondering, like, do resources exist about inclusive genetics terminology in other languages? And if so, maybe you could just say yes and share it with us, and we'll make sure that it gets out to everybody here.
I'm not aware of other languages. I mean, Philippines, for example, we don't have Filipino terms for gender. for male and female gender, so.
Yeah, I think this is evolving. It's just starting to be out there. And I think that's an excellent point. And as Ina says, some languages don't even use gender. So it's very important to recognize that.
Mhm.
Well, thank you both so much. And thank you for all the questions coming in. In a moment, we're going to move into a 30-minute discussion on classroom integration moderated by PG Ed. This is going to be hosted in a separate Zoom meeting so that people can unmute themselves and join the conversation. We're going to provide that link in the chat. I'll also be providing some resources from PG Ed, and I'll turn it over to Sandra to close us out.
Thank you so much, Ina and Robin. That was such a wonderful session. Before we move to the classroom integration discussion, I just wanted to share some resources with you that will be dropped in the chat. We invite you to register for our next ELSI Conversations event, which is entitled the All of Us Research Program, What Duties Do Researchers Have When Conducting Precision Medicine Research? And this is on December 13th at 12 p.m. Eastern. It's a general conversation for those who are interested in ELSI research. We also wanted to invite you to register for the ELSI Friday Forum, which is a monthly series. Our next event will be on the topic of genetic advantages in sports. When do they count as doping? And again, the link to register will be in the chat. If you'd like to know more about different events that the ELSI Hub and Sierra put on, as well as resources, please go ahead and subscribe to our newsletter. That should be also in the chat for you to easily sign up. And then finally, we really appreciate your feedback. You'll be getting a survey to discuss your experience and to make suggestions for us, and we really take that seriously. So if you could give us that feedback, we would be so appreciative. And then finally, we'd like to transition to the classroom integrations strategies discussion, and that link should be in your chat. So we'll move on over there. But thank you so much. This has been fantastic. Thank you.
Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Bye.
Thank you.